We actually met already 2 years ago at Princeton in the United States in a research seminar on religion and violence. And when the idea came up to apply for another research project at STIAS, we thought to focus more on the positive side of the relationship between religion and violence, and thought about a project on non-violence. And because we knew that Mahatma Gandhi developed his concept of non-violence during his 21 years in South Africa, we found it appropriate to do a project on religion and non-violence with a special interest in Gandhi's understanding of non-violence. He coined the term Satyagraha, holding firm to truth. We are doing this project from different disciplinary perspectives, also different interests, but complementing each other. Non-violence is a very important concept to avoid, on the one hand, indifference in regard to social injustice, and violence, which always mirrors each other, and you are easily caught in a spiral of violence. So non-violence as a form of resistance avoids indifference on the one hand and avoids to be caught up in a spiral of violence on the other. The second reason for focusing on Gandhi's understanding of non-violence is that he saw the importance of truth as part of non-violence, and we are living in a time where truth became under pressure for many reasons. We are in a time of conspiracy theories, so we are in a time to focus and strengthen truth is very important. My own contribution on this project will look anthropologically on what Gandhi understood about the danger of violence always mirroring each other, violence easily escalating to extreme. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is to look a little bit deeper on the religious preconditions that enabled Gandhi to develop his concept of non-violence. And you will see that Gandhi had an understanding that all religions are equal. So he saw a deeper religion that unifies all the different religions with their different rights. And to look at that, to look at his understanding of the Sermon on the Mount, to look at his reading of the Bhagavad Gita, and to look on his interpretation of important verses in the Upanishads will give us, in that sense, a good insight into the religious precondition of his understanding of nonviolence.
My name is Noort. I'm coming from the Netherlands, and I have the analytical part in the project, where my colleagues and friends are more on the systematical thing and on the contextual item here in South Africa. I want to study how Gandhi came to his concepts and how it's mirrored in all his writings. These are different writings. There are speeches, it are papers, it are discussions with other people, so that isn't a difference. And what Wolfgang told already is he is taking his sources from all religions. So he is using the scriptures of Hinduism, of Christianity, of Judaism, and of course of Islam. So if you have a look what is in literature outside there is a lot of Gandhi and the Bible, Gandhi and the Quran, Gandhi and the Gita, but they are all looking to their own part of it. And I want to study how he uses the ideas and the systematics of one religion to explain the texts of another. So you see that he explains the New Testament in partly with ideas from the Gita, and that is first time how you see how these cross references are there. The second is how is it developing in this way, for it's not above time and place, it's in time and in place. There was a struggle, there were incidents, and then he reacted. So how he's building up his theory in this way. That is my part, and I do hope that I can get a broader picture of his use of traditions and scriptures. He uses it in two ways. He gives examples, figures, but they can be from scripture and they can be from modern times. So Tolstoy appears next to Socrates and to Daniel from the Hebrew Bible. How does he do that? What is the meaning of it? And the second is the teachings. Where does he take the teachings from, and how do he interrelate them? That is my part, and I'm looking very forward to do it here in the wonderful place of STIAS.
I'm Louise du Toit from Stellenbosch University Philosophy Department, and my interest in Gandhi is to look at the importance of his thinking, but for women, from a feminist perspective. So what does he offer women's politics, women's battles, women's struggles, or does he offer us nothing? And I think with a figure like Gandhi, you always have the problem that scholars of Gandhi either divinize or demonize him, but we really want to find out what exactly was he thinking and what does he offer us, but in the process also not become uncritical of his work. So approaching him explicitly from a feminist perspective, I anticipate to find some limitations in his own thinking possibly, but also discover exciting new cross-fertilizations between feminist thinkers and Gandhi on this topic of active yet non-violent resistance and transformation. I'm especially interested in what does it have to offer women today in South Africa. So we also try to contextualize his thinking in that way. So there are different ways clearly to approach Gandhi in a feminist way. The one would simply be to look at what does Gandhi say about women and what do his relationships with women look like. And that's interesting, but it's very mixed, and I also think it's not sufficient. On the one hand, he had very strong and remarkable relationships with some individual women. On the other hand, he said some very strange and disturbing things about women's sexuality, for instance. So that's one thing one could trace, but to me that's not the most interesting way to go about it. A second way in which one can do a feminist analysis is to trace the development of his central concept of Satyagraha, but then to read it through a feminist lens. In other words, to do a feminist interpretation and critique of Satyagraha. And that can become very interesting when you think of Satyagraha as a kind of virtue ethics. It's something that you have to develop as part of your character and personality, your habitual way of being in the world. And in this regard, he sometimes speaks of Satyagraha as a feminine virtue, controversially because he says women are capable of much suffering. On the other hand, he calls it a masculine virtue because it cannot be offered out of a position of weakness. It must come out of a position of strength and courage. So this already opens up a very interesting conversation around Satyagraha viewed from a feminist virtue perspective. Another way in which one can, of course, put a feminist lens on his work is to put him in conversation with feminist philosophers and feminist political thinkers. And here I thought an especially fruitful discussion can be developed between Gandhi's understanding of nonviolence and Judith Butler's understanding of nonviolence. She published a book in 2020 on the force of nonviolence, and she refers back to Gandhi, so she already sets up the start of a conversation between them, and I think there's a lot to investigate there. And a final way in which I think one can confront Gandhi with feminist concerns is to ask what his work has to teach us in terms of explicitly women's protests, when women put their bodies against the machine or against the system. So if we look at the Women's March to the Union Buildings in South Africa, that famous march, or the naked protests of part of the student protests in South Africa. There are other examples of women protesting to take back the night, for instance. Does his thinking offer us anything in particular when we start to think about women offering Satyagraha in their fight for justice?